Welcome everyone to our first panel. During this discussion, we'll be talking about risk assessment. This is the requirements that federal awarding agencies must do prior to making an award. And joining me in that discussion is Phil Maestri, who's the Director of Risk Management Service at the Department of Education, and Andrea Brandon, who's the Director of the Financial Assistance Policy and Oversight Office at the Department of Homeland Security, and the current co-chair of the Council on Financial Assistance Reform. So welcome. All right, so before we get into questions for you two, just a brief overview of what the Uniform Guidance requires. In Section 200-205 of the Uniform Guidance, this outlines the risk assessment that federal awarding agencies must do prior to making an award. The Uniform Guidance reaffirms the previous guidance, which requires agencies to check OMB designated repositories of information. So for instance, the SAM exclusions list, also known as a suspension and debarment. Further, in July of 2015, the Uniform Guidance was revised to require agencies to check the Federal Awardee Performance Integrity and Information System, also known as FAPIS. In addition to checking those government-wide repositories of information, agencies are also required to complete a risk assessment prior to award. And for competitive awards, they have to go further and have a framework in place for risk assessment, and this must be outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunities. Phil?
Well, Rhea, I actually have a question along the lines of busting myths, if you wouldn't mind. As we are out setting up our programs to do risk assessment and so forth, we get questions from primarily those entities that are pass-through entities, and they have basically concerned a little bit about, is it the same? Are there the requirements for them the same as they are for the federal agencies to do risk assessment in the with the same guidelines? And I know that the guidelines in the OMB circular are pretty clear for the federal agencies, but there's some questions in the pass-through entities. So maybe you could bust that myth.
Okay, great. So the answer is the same, but different, really, right? So it actually depends on the nature of the program, the entity, what they'll be looking for. It's Section 200-205 that outlines responsibilities for the federal agencies, and it's 200-331, which outlines responsibilities for pass-through entities. But both sections allow for a risk-based approach. So actually the practice may vary depending on the nature of the program, the award, or the risk of the subrecipient. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to some questions for you two. Phil, I'm going to start with you. As we just mentioned, Uniform Guidance does not prescribe how agencies evaluate risk and allows some flexibility for a risk-based approach. What factors does the Department of Education consider when evaluating risk?
Actually, it's sort of evolved over time. We started looking at risk in the grantee portfolio almost 10 years ago. And we began trying to figure out what are the things that are challenges for our program officers to be able to identify where the funds might be best utilized, who is best positioned to use those funds. And prior to doing risk assessments, pretty much the only decisions that we used to make especially competitive grant awards were based on the applications. What was the plan? What was going to be delivered? Who were the people that were at play from an expert standpoint? But then we began to look and be concerned a little bit about those organizations being safe and solid enough to be able to manage the funds, because a lot of these grants are pretty large dollar amounts. So we began looking at four basic things from the standpoint of, is the organization fiscally sound? Can they manage that kind of money? Is there a control environment set up in that entity where they have the policies and procedures in place to watch out for the funds? Are they sophisticated enough on their data gathering and management to be able to analyze what's happening and make sure that they have the right kind of controls? And then finally, who are the management? Do they have the business skills to watch out over that? And as we set that up as our framework, then we began to look at what data was out there for us to get access to. And the first thing that came to mind was the single audits. They are standard to the greatest degree, and most of our grantees were required to have a single audit, and we could look at them consistently across grantees. And so we began to synthesize all of the single audit data. And then many of our grantees are prior grantees as well. That's repeat. So we look back to see how did things go in the last grant award or awards, how have they performed in the past. So then we pulled some information from like Dun & Bradstreet when we couldn't get information on some of the smaller grantees. They didn't have single audits. So we bought information from Dun & Bradstreet to look at credit score kinds of information. We also figure out from that if there are bankruptcies involved, if there is criminal activity on behalf of the principals, that will show up in the Dun & Bradstreet. And then we put it together in something we call an entity risk report. And it is essentially a one-page document that shows visually what the scores are in each of those categories, and they go from green to yellow to red, so that a program office can look at that and see mostly green generally, but there's yellows and reds, and they can zero in on knowing those are the places they have to spend their time and effort, because they never have enough resources to do it all, but this helps them focus so that they get the greatest return on that. And then all of the information is generally backed up behind that so that they can click and drill and see the specific information on the audits and the Dun & Bradstreet information. And it goes a long way. And so with those things, then each program office is able to take generic information and tailor it to their program so that they can look at their grantees from a risk standpoint.
Great. So, Phil, you mentioned that 10 years ago you all weren't doing this. Just curious, like, what have been the benefits of this tool, and what are the results that you've seen?
Well, there's a number of different benefits. One of the obvious ones is that when this new circular came out, we were immediately compliant.
Yes.
But we are also, I think, able to not so much identify who shouldn't get a grant award, because that doesn't happen too often. Right. But what it does identify is who needs help. And so we've been using the risk assessments to identify where technical assistance is necessary, maybe where some corrective actions need to happen to strengthen the entity management structure. So I think in the long run we've been improving the ability of the grantees to deliver our programs, and really it's all about performance, and so we want to be able to get them to a place where they can do the best work for that program.
Great. So Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you, give you a chance to speak. Are there certain programs or types of awards from a Department of Homeland Security perspective that your agency deems higher risk, and what are the factors that contribute to that designation?
So basically at the Department of Homeland Security, we have several risk assessment checklists that we use. Two of them that will be available on the COFAR website after this webcast. And also we use a financial capability review checklist as well. And in doing that, once we assess the risk, there's 25 risk areas in one of those checklists. Once we assess those risks, usually the types of agencies that we see that pop out that are higher risk are the small mom and pop organizations, sometimes the faith-based organizations, usually smaller nonprofit organizations that have no history of federal grant making experience. Also, organizations that don't have prior they've had prior financial issues such as fraud or some types of financial instability within their organization. Sometimes they don't have proper accounting systems in place. They have manual entry on a lot of their processes, which can cause types of data entry errors and lack of segregation of duties, et cetera, that type of thing. So we find that a lot in the smaller nonprofit organizations, and sometimes we find it in really, really large organizations that have very complex business processes that again may be very manual and not have a lot of information technology background.
Okay, great. So you two just spoke about what you're looking for and how you kind of determine the risk. If you do deem a recipient or a specific award higher risk, what what do you guys do? To mitigate those risks?
So basically, when we decide that we need to put someone on high risk, we usually modify the terms and conditions of award to make sure that it tells us that maybe we won't give them advance funding. They may have to go on a reimbursement type of situation where we review all of their invoices. Also, we may need to suspend the grant. Sometimes we award it and it's not high risk when we first award it, but after we continue to do monitoring and go out and do site visits, actually we have a site visit checklist that we use, which will also be available after the webcast if you like that. But sometimes we have to suspend the award and have them cure the deficiency. And in very rare cases, we may have to ask that the grant project be transferred to another more stable organization that can actually handle the business processes and the internal controls a little better.
Phil, is it similar at the Department of Education?
It is similar. We do a number of those things. We also have a team that when a school district or a large grantee is identified as truly high risk, that team will go in and work with that grantee to turn around sort of the systemic issues that cause that high risk. If there are accounting system issues, if there are, in our case, student data systems and a number of other kinds of failures at that level, then our team will work with them to identify how to do those basic repairs and build the fundamental infrastructure so that they can build on that and deliver the programs and not worry about so much those things, but worry about the programs.
Okay, great. And also, just I think there's always this fear in the recipient community. Like once you're designated high risk, you kind of stay high risk. There's that perception. Do you all work with recipients to get off this designation?
Yeah, I think as Phil just said, we will definitely go out and do technical assistance with the grant recipients. We want to ensure that they are taken off of high risk. I mean, basically when we give out a grant award, we want to make sure that it's most beneficial for public assistance to get the actual scope of the project done, not that we need to micromanage them the entire time. So definitely we have an intention of going out and providing technical assistance and training and any other types of assistance that they might need in order to get off of high risk.
That's another myth for us to bust.
Yes, exactly.
The myth of being once high risk,
yes.
high risk for life
right.
is a myth. We've had a number of grantees who have been originally named high risk, but because of the attention and the work that they have put in and we have put in to turn those around, there have been a number of them who've come off of high risk, and we celebrate that when that happens.
Great. So, Andrea and Phil, you both have fairly robust programs, and Phil, as you just mentioned, the uniform guidance is still relatively new. It's only been in place for about 1.5 years now. You all have been doing this for 10 years. What advice do you have for either the recipient community or also the federal awarding agencies if they're looking to put into place one of these risk programs?
Sure.
I think that the advice I would have is we are providing a lot of the checklists throughout this webcast. They will be available on the Council of Financial Assistance Reform website. Please take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Go through the checklist, see what it is that we would deem the types of business processes that might actually get you in trouble. And if you find that your organization is lacking those particular business processes, go ahead and use this opportunity to get your house in order and get those things fixed up. And we're always here to help you. Contact whoever's on your grant award in the programmatic office and in the grant side of the house if you need the technical assistance to help straighten things out, because we are always available.
Great. And Phil, any advice?
That's great. I echo what she has said. My biggest advice that I tell people is keep things simple. We can make everything extremely complex, and a lot of the federal programs are very complex to begin with. But risk management doesn't need to be complex, and so they should start simple and build from that point.
All right, great. So thank you to you both. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about risk assessment in our panel regarding subrecipient monitoring. But with that, I think we'll just go ahead and close this panel, and thanks again for joining me.
Thank you.